It was a typical busy evening at a fancy restaurant in the heart of the city. The restaurant was known for its luxurious decor and high-end clientele, attracting the city's elite. As the door swung open, a group of well-dressed individuals walked in. Leading the pack was a young woman who seemed to catch the attention of everyone around her. She was wearing a sparkling designer dress, her hair perfectly styled, and her posture was straight, as if she owned the place. She was used to people looking at her with awe. Her name was Vanessa, and her life was nothing short of privileged. Coming from a family with more wealth than most could even imagine, Vanessa had grown up with everything she could ever want. Money had always been at her fingertips, and the world seemed to revolve around her. Her friends were just like her, rich, carefree, and always expecting the best. As they walked toward their reserved table, Vanessa acted as though she was the star of the evening, without even realizing that not everyone around her shared her level of comfort or confidence. The waitress who greeted them was a young woman, in her mid-20s, wearing the standard black and white uniform of the restaurant. She was pleasant, yet her smile couldn't hide the nervousness in her eyes. She had likely dealt with customers like Vanessa before, the kind who felt entitled and above others. The waitress showed them to their table, and as she handed Vanessa the menu, there was a brief moment of awkwardness. Vanessa looked her up and down, her eyes scanning the uniform and then her face, making it clear that she wasn't impressed. "You must be desperate to be working here," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Her friends laughed along, enjoying the moment at the waitress's expense. Vanessa's words were sharp, her tone condescending. She didn't think twice about mocking the woman who was simply trying to do her job. To Vanessa, people like the waitress were invisible, a mere background in her life of privilege. The waitress, trying to remain professional, smiled and nodded, saying nothing. But as she walked away, the sting of the words hit her harder than she let on. She wasn't new to this kind of treatment, but it never made it easier to deal with. Despite the insult, she kept her head high and focused on doing her job. She had no choice but to carry on and provide excellent service, no matter how rude the customer might be. Vanessa's laughter continued to echo in the air as she and her friends settled into their seats. They ordered their food, and the conversation quickly turned to the latest gossip and the events they had attended that week. But Vanessa couldn't help but glance at the waitress every so often, not in a caring way, but in a way that made her feel like she was above her. It was a strange power dynamic. Vanessa, with all her wealth and status, looking down on someone who was simply trying to make a living. Little did she know, this night would not unfold the way she expected. Vanessa's world, which had always been so certain and self-assured, was about to be shaken in the most unexpected of ways. But for now, she was oblivious to the shift that was just around the corner. The night at the restaurant continued, and Vanessa felt completely at ease. She was surrounded by her friends, who were just as wealthy and self-assured as she was. The table was filled with laughter, gossip, and the occasional clink of expensive glasses. For Vanessa, the world seemed to revolve around her. She had always been treated like someone special, and she liked it that way. The fact that her family owned multiple businesses and lived in one of the most luxurious parts of the city made her feel untouchable. People like her didn't have to worry about anything. Life was supposed to be easy, and she made sure everyone knew it. The waitress came back to take their drink orders, but before she could speak, Vanessa interrupted her with another comment, her tone dripping with superiority. "You know, you really shouldn't be working here," she said, glancing down at the waitress's uniform with an exaggerated look of distaste. "Don't you think you should be doing something more, something better for yourself?" Her friends giggled, clearly enjoying the moment. One of them even added, "Maybe she should try something more glamorous, like being a model." The table burst into laughter at the suggestion, and Vanessa joined in. She felt powerful. She had always been told that she was above others, and moments like this reinforced that belief. She loved making people laugh, especially at someone else's expense. As the waitress walked away, Vanessa smirked, satisfied with herself. Her friends were still laughing, and Vanessa felt like the queen of the world. After all, what could a simple waitress possibly know about the kind of life she led? She was just another person in the background, one of the many who served people like Vanessa. But as the evening wore on, something strange started to happen. Every time the waitress came to their table, Vanessa found herself glancing at her more and more. There was something different about the way the woman carried herself. Despite the mocking comments that had been thrown her way, she was always polite, never raising her voice or showing signs of discomfort. Vanessa, still feeling on top of the world, didn't think much of it at first. She was used to seeing people in service jobs as being beneath her, so she didn't think it would be worth paying attention to anyone who wasn't on her level. Yet, something about the calm composure of the waitress made Vanessa wonder if maybe she wasn't so different from the people she so easily mocked. It was a fleeting thought, but it lingered in the back of her mind. After they had finished their meals and were waiting for dessert, Vanessa's eyes once again found the waitress. This time, however, she wasn't just standing at the table or walking between them. She was preparing something at the far side of the room. There was a sense of quiet concentration in the way she moved, the way she handled her tasks. It was almost as if the woman had a certain elegance, despite the simplicity of her job. Vanessa tried to ignore the feeling of guilt creeping up on her. She had been cruel, but it was just harmless fun, right? She justified her actions by telling herself that people like the waitress should be able to take a joke. She was just having fun, not really meaning to hurt anyone. But deep down, there was a part of her that was starting to wonder whether she had crossed a line. Before she could think about it further, the sound of music caught her attention. The restaurant's lights dimmed, and a live band began to set up in the corner. Vanessa turned her attention away from the waitress, eager to see the performance. But little did she know, this was the moment when everything was about to change. As the live band began to set up, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The noise of clinking silverware and soft chatter faded into the background as the spotlight focused on the small stage in the corner. Vanessa, momentarily distracted from her usual focus on herself, turned her attention to the musicians preparing their instruments. She was expecting an average performance, maybe something calm and pleasant, but nothing extraordinary. After all, she had attended many of these kinds of events before. What could possibly surprise her here? Her thoughts were interrupted when the waitress, who'd been serving them all night, suddenly stepped forward. Vanessa was taken aback when she saw the woman approach the stage, her movements purposeful and confident. She wasn't just walking to the back or cleaning up. She was headed toward the spotlight. There was no hint of hesitation in her step. Vanessa's curiosity grew as she watched her, confused and unsure of what to expect. Then, something even more surprising happened. The waitress, now standing at the center of the stage, picked up a violin. Vanessa had assumed she was just an ordinary server, someone with a simple job and a simple life. But now she was holding an elegant instrument, one that Vanessa herself could never afford. As the waitress adjusted the violin under her chin, the room fell silent. Even the noise from the kitchen seemed to quiet down. The moment the first note escaped from the violin, Vanessa was struck by the sound. It wasn't just music. It was something beautiful, something hauntingly powerful. The waitress, the very person she had mocked earlier, was playing with such skill and emotion that it felt like the music was reaching into Vanessa's soul. The notes seemed to wrap around her, filling the room with a sense of peace and wonder that she hadn't expected to experience that evening. Vanessa's friends, too, fell silent as the performance unfolded. It was impossible to ignore the talent on display. Vanessa's mouth hung open in disbelief as she watched the waitress move with such grace, her fingers gliding effortlessly across the strings. The entire restaurant was captivated by the performance, their attention fully focused on her. It was like the woman had transformed from the ordinary server into an artist, someone with the power to make the world stop for just a moment. Vanessa's previous assumptions about the waitress started to crumble. She wasn't just a worker in a restaurant. She was a musician, a talented individual with a gift that few could truly appreciate. As the music played on, Vanessa felt a shift within herself. Her initial thoughts of superiority were slowly fading, replaced by something unfamiliar. It was a feeling of respect, maybe even awe. She began to wonder how many other people she had looked down on without ever considering that they might be far more than what their job title suggested. She couldn't help but think back to all the cruel jokes she had made earlier. How wrong she had been to mock someone for simply doing their job. Here was a woman, standing in front of a crowd, sharing her extraordinary talent with everyone. Vanessa's chest tightened with a mix of guilt and admiration. She couldn't believe she had judged someone so harshly when, in reality, she had no idea who they really were or what they were capable of. As the performance continued, Vanessa's mind raced. She had always been so caught up in her own world, in the bubble of wealth and privilege, that she hadn't stopped to consider the value of others. She had dismissed people like the waitress, assuming their lives were ordinary and uneventful. But in this moment, she was realizing just how wrong she had been. The music finally came to an end, and the room erupted into applause. Vanessa clapped, along with everyone else, but it felt different this time. She wasn't just applauding out of courtesy, she was applauding because she genuinely appreciated what she had just witnessed. The woman, who had been nothing more than a waitress to her moments ago, had shown her something far more valuable: true talent, humility, and grace. As the applause filled the restaurant, Vanessa sat frozen in her seat, her hands still clapping, but her mind far away. She hadn't realized how much the music had affected her until the last note faded. The sound lingered in the air, as if it was still vibrating in her chest. For the first time that evening, she felt a strange mixture of emotions she didn't quite understand. Guilt, admiration, and a deep sense of regret all collided inside her. Her friends, still caught up in the performance, were talking excitedly, complimenting the waitress-turned-musician on her talent. But Vanessa couldn't bring herself to join in. All she could think about was the cruel comments she had made earlier, the jokes she had laughed at, the harsh words she had spoken without a second thought. How could she have been so heartless? The waitress had been nothing more than an object of her amusement. Vanessa had assumed that because she was wealthy and well-dressed, she was somehow better than the people around her. But now, as she sat there, Vanessa realized how wrong she had been. The waitress had not only proved herself with her incredible musical skill, but she had also shown Vanessa something even more important: her own ignorance. Vanessa's mind raced back to the earlier moments of the night. She remembered the way she had looked at the waitress, how she had made fun of her job and appearance. She had acted like she was above it all, mocking someone who had just been doing her job. Now, Vanessa could see how shallow and unfair that judgment had been. It wasn't just that the waitress had talent, it was the way she carried herself. Even after everything Vanessa had said, she hadn't let it show. She had remained poised, calm, and focused. Vanessa, on the other hand, had never truly faced a challenge like that. Sure, she had faced difficulties in her life, but they were always easily solved by money or connections. She had never had to fight for respect or prove herself in the way the waitress had. The thought hit her hard. How many times had she taken things for granted? How many people had she judged based on their outward appearance, assuming they had nothing to offer? The more she thought about it, the more ashamed she felt. She had built her entire identity on her wealth, her status, her clothes, and the people she surrounded herself with. But now, she was beginning to understand that none of that truly defined her. What defined a person was their character, their abilities, their kindness. The waitress had shown her that. Vanessa glanced at the woman once again, who was now packing up her violin and preparing to leave the stage. The transformation was still fresh in her mind. The quiet, polite woman who had served her food earlier was now someone who had captured the attention and admiration of everyone in the room. Vanessa was deeply moved by this, not just because of the music, but because of the inner strength it must have taken for the waitress to continue doing her job with grace, even in the face of mockery. Her heart felt heavy with regret. Vanessa realized she had to do something. She couldn't just sit there, pretending everything was fine. She needed to make amends. The guilt she felt was consuming her, and she knew that she couldn't just walk away from this without trying to make it right. Before she could think it through, Vanessa stood up and walked towards the stage where the waitress was packing away her violin. Her friends, still caught up in the excitement of the performance, barely noticed her leave the table. But Vanessa knew what she had to do. She had to apologize, not just for herself, but for the way she had been raised to look down on people who were different from her. As she approached the waitress, her heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure what to say or how to even begin, but she knew one thing for sure. She needed to try. Vanessa walked slowly toward the stage, her heart racing with every step. She had no script in her head, no rehearsed speech. She wasn't sure what she was going to say, but she knew she had to say something. The guilt she felt was overwhelming, and the only way to begin healing was to face the person she had hurt. As she approached, the waitress, now sitting with her violin, looking much more relaxed, looked up in surprise. Her eyes briefly met Vanessa's, and for a moment there was an awkward silence. The music had stopped, and the restaurant had started to return to its usual hum. But for Vanessa, time seemed to slow down. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. She felt nervous, unsure of how her apology would be received. Finally, Vanessa cleared her throat and took a deep breath. I need to say something, she began, her voice soft but sincere. Earlier I was rude, and I made you feel small. The waitress tilted her head slightly, as though unsure of where this was going, but Vanessa continued. I mocked you, and I was wrong. I judged you without knowing anything about you, and I can't tell you how sorry I am for that. The words felt awkward as they left her mouth, but they were real. Vanessa had never apologized like this before. It wasn't easy for someone who was used to getting what she wanted, to admitting that she was wrong. But the more she spoke, the more she realized just how important it was to say it, to truly apologize, not just with words, but with sincerity. I didn't know who you were, Vanessa said, her voice trembling slightly. I thought you were just a waitress, but you're so much more than that. You're incredible, and I was awful to you. I'm really sorry. For a moment, there was stillness between them. Vanessa felt exposed, vulnerable, as though she had laid herself bare in front of the woman she had once looked down on. She wasn't used to feeling this way, but there was something incredibly freeing about finally admitting her mistake. The waitress looked at her for a moment, her expression softening. It wasn't a look of anger or resentment, but something more understanding. Slowly, she smiled, a small but genuine smile. Thank you, she said quietly. I appreciate your apology. There was no sarcasm in her voice, no bitterness, just calm acceptance. Vanessa was surprised by how calm the waitress was. She had expected some kind of anger, maybe even a sharp retort, but the woman just looked at her with kindness. Vanessa felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had been afraid that this apology would somehow make things worse, but the waitress's response was nothing like what she had feared. Instead, it made her feel like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for change. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Vanessa added, her voice gaining confidence. But I just wanted you to know that I see you. I see how much more you are than just a waitress, and I'll never make that mistake again. The waitress nodded, her expression still calm and collected. We all have our moments, she said, her tone gentle. I appreciate your honesty. I can see you're trying to be better. That's what matters. Vanessa was taken aback by the warmth in her voice. It wasn't the harsh judgment that Vanessa had expected. Instead, it was something much more powerful, understanding. It made Vanessa feel even more humbled, She realized that sometimes a simple act of kindness could go further than anything else. As Vanessa turned to leave, she felt lighter, almost as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't sure if the waitress truly forgave her or not, but the fact that she had taken the first step toward acknowledging her mistake was enough for now. She had learned something valuable that evening, not just about the waitress, but about herself. Vanessa had come to realize that people were not defined by their jobs or their social status. What truly mattered was how a person treated others, their character, and their ability to rise above judgment. As she returned to her table, she felt a new sense of respect for everyone around her, a respect that went beyond appearances and assumptions. As Vanessa walked back to her table, she felt a strange sense of peace that she hadn't expected. The conversation with the waitress had left her feeling lighter, as though a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She couldn't help but smile to herself. In that moment, she realized that her world had just shifted in a way she hadn't anticipated. The events of the evening had opened her eyes to something much more important than the shallow life she had been leading. She now understood that true value wasn't found in wealth or status, but in the respect and kindness you showed to others. Her friends were still chatting excitedly, not noticing the change in her. They continued to talk about the performance, but Vanessa found herself no longer interested in the surface-level conversations they were having. For the first time, she felt disconnected from the people she had once felt so close to. They were still caught up in their own world of luxury, gossip, and materialism, while she was standing on the edge of something much deeper, something that was beginning to feel more real than anything she had known before. As she sat back down, she noticed a shift in her thoughts. She wasn't focused on the designer dress she was wearing, or the expensive meal in front of her. Instead, her mind kept returning to the words of the waitress. "We all have our moments." Those words kept echoing in her head. Vanessa realized that it wasn't just the waitress who had shown strength and grace, it was herself as well. She had taken the hard step of admitting her mistakes, something she had never done so openly before. It wasn't easy, and it hadn't been comfortable, but she knew it was the right thing to do. Her friends continued to chat away, completely unaware of the transformation happening inside her. They were still laughing at jokes that now felt shallow, still talking about the same old things that no longer held any significance for her. Vanessa began to question her relationships with them. She had always surrounded herself with people who praised her and fed into her inflated sense of importance. But now, sitting at the table with them, she felt like an outsider in her own life. They weren't bad people, but they were living in a world she no longer wanted to be a part of. As the night wore on, Vanessa found herself thinking more and more about the things that really mattered. She thought about her family, her values, and how she wanted to spend her life moving forward. She realized that she had been so caught up in the pursuit of wealth and status that she had lost sight of what truly brought happiness, connection, kindness, and respect for others. When the bill arrived, Vanessa felt a sense of relief. It wasn't because the meal was over, but because she knew that the evening had marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that restaurant hours ago. She had learned something profound that night, and she knew that she would never be the same again. As she paid the bill, she looked around at her friends one last time. They were still talking, still laughing, but something had changed in her. She wasn't going to continue down the same path anymore. It wasn't enough to simply apologize to the waitress. It was time for her to make changes in her life, to be more mindful of how she treated others, and to embrace a new perspective, one that valued people for who they were, not what they had. Vanessa left the restaurant that night with a renewed sense of purpose. She had a long road ahead of her, but she knew she was on the right track, and that feeling of knowing she was beginning to change for the better was worth more than any amount of money or status. As the days passed after that evening at the restaurant, Vanessa found herself thinking more about the encounter with the waitress. What had started as an embarrassing mistake had transformed into something more profound. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had changed in a way that was hard to describe. The moment of self-reflection had sparked something inside her, a desire to become someone better, someone who looked beyond appearances and understood the true value of others. Vanessa realized that the apology, though important, was just the first step. It wasn't enough to simply say the words. She had to prove her change, not only to others, but to herself as well. She thought about her life, the things she had prioritized, the values she had held, and the way she had treated people in the past. It was clear that her previous actions hadn't always been aligned with who she truly wanted to be. The realization stung, but it was also freeing. Vanessa now had the chance to rebuild her character, to start fresh. One of the first things she did was change the way she interacted with the people around her. She began to pay more attention to the individuals she had once overlooked. She started noticing the details, the hard work, the dedication, and the strength of the people she had dismissed as below her. The waitress had reminded her of something crucial. Everyone had a story, a unique talent, and a worth that went beyond their job or status. Vanessa began reaching out to people she had once ignored. She started conversations with those who served her, those who worked behind the scenes. It felt strange at first, but the more she did it, the more natural it became. She realized that making these connections brought her more satisfaction than any superficial interaction ever had. Her friends noticed the change in her too. At first, they were surprised by how much more thoughtful she had become. She no longer joined in on the jokes at others' expense, and she seemed less interested in the latest trends or gossip. Instead, she began to focus on deeper conversations, ones that challenged her thinking and helped her see the world in a new light. Vanessa's friends were curious, asking her what had sparked the change. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew it had something to do with the simple, yet profound lesson she had learned that night. One evening, a few weeks later, Vanessa found herself back at that same restaurant with her friends. They had decided to return to celebrate a milestone, and it felt different this time. As they entered, she glanced around, remembering the evening when everything had shifted for her. She couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just the setting that had changed. It was her. To her surprise, the waitress was there again, working that same night. Vanessa felt a rush of gratitude, remembering how that moment of connection had opened her eyes. She approached the waitress again, this time with a smile and a sense of humility she hadn't had before. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, her voice sincere. "That night you played your music. It changed something in me. I just wanted to let you know that I haven't forgotten, and I'm trying to be a better person because of it." The waitress smiled warmly, her eyes sparkling with understanding. "I'm glad to hear that," she said simply. Vanessa left the restaurant that night feeling lighter than ever. She knew her journey wasn't over, but she had taken a crucial step toward becoming someone who valued people for who they were, not for what they had or what they could do for her. It wasn't always going to be easy, but Vanessa was ready to live a life that was richer in meaning, not in wealth. She had learned a lesson that would stay with her forever, that it's never too late to change, and that the people you meet along the way can teach you things you never expected to learn. The road ahead would be long, but Vanessa was no longer afraid of the challenges that lay before her. She was ready to face them, with respect, kindness, and a heart that was open to the world.